Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of The Damage Report with me, John Arola, and very lucky to be joined by the hardest working person this week, dear God, Adrienne Lawrence.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It has been a little bit busy.
It has been and will continue to be a little bit busy. So I was excited to find out earlier this week that Adrienne was going to be joining us. I did not know that Adrienne would be then going immediately on to lead the episode of Indisputable today. So that is a solid 3-hour block of Adrienne. How are you feeling about it? And what are you, we'll give people a little bit of a tease. What are you gonna be discussing on Indisputable today?
Oh, so on Indisputable, we are going to be talking about, the unfortunate events that are going on right now with more shootings, also some interesting things coming out of Ohio and California's huge reparations project and a lot more. And I'm feeling up to it. I got my water here. I have some snacks.
Keep hydrated, keep your blood sugar level at a healthy point. Good, I like it. Well, look, we got a lot that we're gonna be talking about too, including a little bit on shootings. I've been looking for a little bit of good news. I'm not saying that there's a lot, but we're gonna get to what there is. And then we're gonna be talking about student loan debt and the sort of legal ideological battle around social media platforms. Coffee, a really interesting move that the RNC is taking. That I can't wait for us to dive into that. And then later on, we've got animal news. We've got a debate of fake meat versus fake meat. What does that even mean? We're gonna describe it later on, but definitely buckle up and hold on to your butts as we launch into this. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button or sharing the stream, that'd be great so that people know that we're live. And along the way, if you wanna send us tweets, comments, super chats, or anything like that, we'll respond as we go. But with all that said, Adrienne, are you ready to do this thing?
Let's rock.
Okay, let's do it. Let's jump, in fact, directly into this.
We absolutely know, without any question, to me at least, that why in the world is an 18-year-old buying an assault weapon? A 21-year-old, I'd welcome it. But really and truly, we know all of the stuff that's going on social media all across the land. We know of the profanity. We know of absolutely all the different stuff, all the porn, all the bad stuff that's out there that is getting in the minds of our children. We know all these violent video games that are out there getting in the minds of our children. Why don't we do something about it?
So that is Governor Jim Justice. And what he just said there is what passes these days for a hopeful development when it comes to gun control, because despite the fact that most of that video is him talking about a whole bunch of nonsense that he seems to be indicating is responsible for gun violence, including things like pornography and video games and all of these things that every other country on the planet has. What they don't have is the shootings, things that by the very nature of how reality works can't be responsible because they don't cause those things anywhere else than the United States. All of that aside, and we will dive into that, he indicated potentially being supportive of raising the age to be able to buy an assault weapon from 18, which he thinks is objectively wrong, to 21, where he would welcome it. I would have a follow-up question. Why? Why would you be excited about that? What is the massive difference between 18 and 21? I get it, that's the debate that we're having as a nation. But in any event, Adrienne, he at least seems supportive of making the sort of change that, in the case of the Uvalde shooting, would have stopped this event from happening, or at the very least would have stopped it from being anywhere near as deadly as it was.
Yeah, and the thing is like, I really do want to discuss all the potential options for how to curb this, but I think it's pretty disingenuous not to simply acknowledge and admit that eliminating these assault rifles and removing them from the streets is an easy way to prevent these kind of things from happening. And so dancing around this age requirement and even suggesting moving it to 21 or not, it's like, it's all cute and it seems all good, but it's not actually going to be truly effective, because there's definitely seems to be a pattern when it comes to a lot of these mass shootings, especially when they are involving children and other youth. But at the same time, the gun is the one consistent thing, no matter what that pattern shows.
Exactly. Yeah. You could be obsessed with pornography. You could spend every day hours and hours on porn or playing Elden Ring. You could be obsessed with all the things you just talked about. You are not going to be able to just manifest massive amounts of brutal death. The gun is an important component of that, but of course they're not interested in banning it. But like I said, we're looking for good news in the real world. So there's a bit of good news for you. Here is maybe a bit of good news. Another Republican governor of Arkansas, Governor Hutchinson, said he's open to having a conversation on raising the minimum age requirements, specifically for AR-15 style weapons. Adam Kinzinger said that he's open for a federal ban on those rifles, as well as raising the age requirements. Of course, a governor being in supportive of it is very different than the least popular Republican congressman being in support of it. And in Congress, theoretically, these things would pass without Republicans being needed, in the House at least. So maybe a couple places at the state level, the governor wouldn't veto it. That is not the same thing as the Republican legislatures of those states being willing to put those things forward. So again, who knows if even in these areas it'll happen, but we did briefly talk, it had happened, we found out about it live on the show yesterday, that New York is going to be raising the age to buy an assault rifle to 21, as well as banning body armor. Bill's gonna prohibit not only the body armor, but also require a license to purchase a semi-automatic rifle, make threatening mass harm a crime. I guess it wasn't. Strengthen the state's red flag laws. The measure would also require new pistols to be equipped with micro-stamping technology, which uses lasers to imprint markings on a firearm to make it easier to trace guns to registered owners. That's the sort of very reasonable stuff that the NRA is always against. The bill would raise the age to buy assault rifles to bring New York in line with states like Illinois, Washington, Hawaii, and Florida. So that's, I think, most of the good news. Maybe there's other stuff that you can cite, Adrienne, but that's the good news that I've found. Or at least hopeful news.
And the thing is, again, it is somewhat hopeful without a doubt, but still it's a problem that we even have these firearms. It's so incredibly sad that the GOP let the ban on these assault weapons lapse, because now people feel they're entitled to it. People have them and they feel like they should continue to have them. And so we're gonna continue to bump these restrictions in these very almost meaningless ways that aren't gonna truly address the issue of mass shootings. Also, too, just moving up that age requirement doesn't mean that people aren't still gonna access guns. Lord knows you have alcohol, access that at 21, but Lord knows we've been accessing that since probably like early teens. So it's not going to necessarily change the game, but it's cute. It's just not effective.
Exactly. Yeah. I wish that we had more. I wish that we could have higher hopes. And I know, some people last week were like, oh, maybe an opening. And I was being a killjoy and everything. And again, it's not to say that nothing is changing. I mean, after all, like New York did pass that, bringing New York's gun laws into line with what I considered the bare minimum of what I already thought New York did. Apparently, they weren't great in those areas. But anyway, that's what we've got. There were big promises made initially. Joe Biden saying, we can do this. I mean, not me, I'm powerless, I can't do anything, but somebody surely can do this, especially because we've got reasonable Republicans that we can work with. And I have done everything I can to track down the reasonable Republicans. I've given credit to people like Jim Justice and Governor Hutchinson, but two of the people that he cited, one was Mitch McConnell, reasonable Republican. McConnell apparently told Manu Raju, it seems to me there are two broad categories that underscore the problem: mental illness and school safety. So that's what this bipartisan group supposedly is going to work on, is mental illness and school safety. You'll notice what's missing from that. The other reasonable Republican, of course, was John Cornyn of Texas, who responded to a tweet about the possibility that Cornyn would support literally any gun control whatsoever, to which John Cornyn said, not gonna happen. So those are the two individuals that Joe Biden is like, no, there are still good Republicans like Mitch McConnell, who called himself the Grim Reaper of Congress, and John Cornyn, Big John himself, who believes that guns are the single most important thing in America, Adrienne. Those are the ones that Biden would have us believe are gonna cross over and do the reasonable thing.
Yeah, I'm really tired of Biden's thought that everyone is going to be reasonable, that they can all work together, reach your hand across the aisle. The reality is that it's shown time and time again that he's dealing with an entirely new GOP. It shows you that Biden is completely and totally out of touch, that all of the gentlemen's agreements from the past, they dissipated. They are absolutely gone post-Trump. And so you actually have to take your gloves off and get in this. And it'd be nice to have a president who is truly invested enough to be hip to the game and stop wishing these were the good old days.
Yeah, and look, there's people. So Mac Bain is pointing out, I think, a good point, saying that in theory you can pass these sorts of state level laws, but as with Rittenhouse, we can see that a different state having worse laws could still result in gun violence in your place. And that is totally true. That said, still do it. Like, raising the age isn't necessarily gonna stop them. Making them, like, none of these things are necessarily singularly going to stop any particular act of violence, let alone all acts of violence. But we have got to do something, and I would say as many things as we can do that seem like they might actually be related to the violence. I'm not talking about like banning pornography like JP Mandel. Is that his name? JP Vance. I get it now. Trump has incepted me and I don't know their names anymore. That is not actually going to help. And they don't want to do it. They're just wasting our time. But any of these laws that we can pass that would help, I think is a good thing to move into. Now that said, let's move to what one particular state wants to do. Governor Greg Abbott has been under a lot of pressure on the topic of guns ever since last week's devastating shooting in Uvalde. And people are angry at him for willingly or unknowingly spreading misinformation about the shooting in the wake of it. And in the lead up to that shooting, cutting funding for mental health services, opening up Texas's gun laws, seeming to be perfectly fine with creating an environment where anyone can get massively deadly weapons if they want to. Well, now he is saying he does want to do something to stop future school shootings. The issue is with what he wants to focus on and what he doesn't. He sent a letter to people he's gonna work with in the state legislature, saying that they do want to prevent these shootings, but gun control is not on the list of things that he wants to focus on. In fact, let's go ahead to a screenshot from his actual letter. He wants to do a special legislative session to focus on school safety, mental health, social media, police training, and firearm safety. Now, look, me as the little bit of optimism I still have would say, well, wouldn't a part of gun safety being not letting people who won't be safe with those guns buy them? But that is not what they mean there, Adrienne. So it's gonna be on making sure that the police are more brave in the future. And then, I don't know, school safety, I guess that's fewer doors or something. None of the stuff that we know would actually contribute to fewer mass shootings.
No, exactly. And also things that haven't been shown to necessarily be effective, like the police. Like how much funding needs to go to them for them to get it right? Knowing that 40% of Uvalde's municipal budget was going to police, and we saw what they did in that moment when they were needed and they were armed, equipped, and they had all the knowledge and all the technology, everything they needed to execute, and it did not get done. So let's stop throwing our money down a well and let's just address the issue, which may mean gun manufacturers make less money, but it also means fewer of us die. And that sounds kind of cool.
It does 100%. And yeah, you're right to focus on like how much more funding, but that is what they're gonna do. This is going to result in more funding. There is nothing that happens with guns, whether it's discussion of gun control or mass shootings, that doesn't result in more gun sales. And there's nothing that can happen in terms of the mass shootings that isn't going to result in more funding going to the police. And that was what I was saying all over the last week. It's one of the reasons I didn't like that we were focusing so much on the fact that the police had both failed and lied. It made sense to, we had to, but it also meant that the conversation was about, well, if only the police had done better, and thus some people will believe, oh, then let's have them do better. But that isn't the solution to the problem. They'll get more money for training. They've already been training for these exact situations. Specifically in Uvalde, they had been trained. The documents were clear about what they were supposed to do. They just didn't do those things. And more funding, more sessions, that is not the solution. The solution is not having kids running around with AR-15s. But that is what they're going to focus on. If they do anything in Texas, it is not going to be anything that stops the next potential school shooter from just walking in and buying an AR-15. And we can only hope that once they do that, there's not enough doors for them to get into the school. Anyway, let's talk about what's actually been going on while all of this has been being debated. Gun violence and more mass shootings. In fact, so many that, again, we can't cover all of them, but let's catch you up a little bit on what's been going on. A man carrying a rifle and a handgun opened fire in a medical office building in Tulsa, Oklahoma just yesterday, killing 4 people and injuring several others before taking his own life. He had, well, what do you know, an AR-15 style firearm, as well as a handgun. Nobody can explain why he would go to all the trouble of getting something like an AR-15 when hammers and machetes are just as effective at killing lots of people, according to the right. To be clear though, You might be thinking of the wrong mass shooting when I say that this happened in a medical office building, because there was also a shooting yesterday where a security guard was killed by an inmate who eventually killed himself. That was at a Miami Valley Hospital in Dayton, Ohio. That is a different hospital shooting. In America, we have multiple hospital-based mass shootings, Adrienne. It's an amazing system that we've set up here.
Yeah, and it's interesting how these individuals who are supposed to be pivotal parts of our society and truly contribute to it by helping people, teachers and doctors, medical people, are now in positions where what people are going to talk about arming them. Get out of here. These people have a job to do, whether it is guiding young lives or whether it is saving actual lives. And yet still lawmakers aren't willing to take away the guns, make them go away, as opposed to trying to arm these individuals. And I feel so just incredibly bad for these medical individuals who've just been through COVID, and they sacrifice so much and they put so many things on the line, even their own lives and risk. And then to find this, to have this attack, and this really shows you that gun violence is permeating every aspect of our society, and we're not gonna stop until we get control over the guns.
Exactly. And in the meantime, so long as we don't have that control, let's see, there was also a shooting at a high school here in LA. There was a shooting at a Walmart in Pennsylvania. This, by the way, is not all of the shootings that happened. These are just some of the particularly egregious shootings that have happened. In fact, there was an investigation that found 24 separate shooting incidents just yesterday. The Gun Violence Archive, though, they documented 60. So it all really comes down to how many people need to be shot for us to take notice literally at all, even for analysis like this, let alone for actual news coverage. Again, there's just too much gun violence in America for us to do that. And that's the people who actually act on it. In the background, you also have the level of just people like this Oklahoma man who is threatening repeatedly to bomb and shoot students at LA schools for some reason. Thankfully, he didn't at least do it, but that is the sort of terror that we are constantly living under. The actual violence that's right now, as I'm saying this, there is an active shooting somewhere in America that is going on. And there are also the threats being made against schools, or being made against synagogues, or being made against reproductive care facilities. The terror just never ends. Any final thoughts?
It's as much as we definitely need to address the guns, we also have to look at how we got here, because it's not just capitalism, it's also this patriarchal regime. We've seen months of people attacking this thought of masculinity is dying, or, oh, you don't know, real men are being turned into children, and children, aren't being allowed to grow up to be real men. All of this stuff that is just toxic as hell. And also coming out of this pandemic, we do have a lot of mental health problems across the board, but also we have a patriarchy problem. And we need to address these things, because as much as the guns, removing them will mean people kill fewer people at once, it's still not necessarily gonna address that underlying issue of people engaging in violence and seeing that as the answer. So we could do this as a 1-2 punch. It doesn't matter, but we just need to do it.
Yeah, you're totally right. And it is weird when they will identify that like some of these shooters consume pornography or play video games, when that is the vast majority of the population. Most people, particularly people who don't shoot people, consume those things. But they don't think it's fair to focus on any of the potential political or ideological things. So if you're into Fallout, the game, then that's worthy of conversation. But if you have engaged with a ton of like online forums, like making misogynistic or anti-Semitic or racist comments, that is not a contributing factor. That is nothing. If you play Mortal Kombat, maybe we can get into it. If you listen to certain music, maybe. But like fantasizing about committing acts of violence against particular people, whether based on gender or religion or ideology or race, that is not worthy of bringing up in this conversation. By the way, we had a great suggestion from someone in the audience that we should have a ticker on the side of the screen tracking the gun violence. It would be difficult, as we're describing, to know exactly what to include in there. But according to the Gun Violence Archive, there have already been 233 mass shootings so far this year. That's not shootings, that's mass shootings. So at least 4 people have to be shot. So if you whip out an AR-15 and you shoot 3 people, that is not a mass shooting, just to be clear. In any event, we're gonna take our first break, and then when we come back, we're gonna be mixing it up, talking about some totally different stuff. So don't go anywhere. Adrienne and I will be back after this. Okay, everybody, get ready for a little bit of good news, sort of. Good news, everyone. Student loan debt cancellation is happening, but not the one that you're thinking of. It's actually a very small segment of it. But hey, good news is good news. So the US Department of Education is going to be forgiving nearly $6 billion of accrued federal student loan debt that was generated for people who went to Corinthian colleges, which is a chain of for-profit colleges that has a long documented history of utterly deceiving students into going there and racking up absolutely magnificent amounts of student loan debt. So this cancellation is going to affect all borrowers who attended Corinthian schools and took out loans between 1995 to 2015. It's expected to total about $5.8 billion for 560,000 borrowers, which is a lot. That's on top of the 100,000 Corinthian debtors who have already received full or partial relief. And thankfully, in this case, those who are going to get the cancellation are not going to have to apparently do anything. They're just going to receive letters that they received a discharge. So that's good. The opposite of even the conversations about $10,000 of cancellation for all those with student loan debt, which thanks to the fact that they're going to be baking in income requirements and stuff like that, God only knows the paperwork you're going to have to go through. But considering Corinthian colleges passed, this is great news. We've talked about it in the past. We're going to update you a little bit. They were found to have aggressively pitched students on enrollment, offering loans that were up to 10 times the comparable cost of a community college degree. Job placement statistics were fudged. Instructors included disbarred lawyers. Students were given college credit for externships at fast food restaurants. Several final exams were open book, and some involved playing board games. That is the only part of this that I don't have any problem with. After graduating, students were sent off with credentials that actively harmed their career prospects, and they spoke of being laughed at in job interviews. So look, devastating that so many people put their hopes and aspirations into going to this place, generated a backbreaking amount of debt, and then found it actually harder to get jobs in the future. This was a massive injustice. And so thankfully, after only 20 years after some of them went to this school, the cancellation is coming. So Adrienne, in this area, this is the good news that we've got.
And I really want to be grateful for it, but of course I can't, because there's so many people out there who definitely need debt relief for student loans who didn't go to Corinthian colleges. And also too, the government knew Corinthian colleges was engaged in this fraudulent behavior. So as far as I'm concerned, those students shouldn't pay regardless. So I don't really want to say thank you at all when this should have been done a long time ago.
Yeah, and I wonder, for those who spent years paying down the debt, do they get compensated for? I know that's the conversation that always happens when we talk about generalized student loan debt cancellation. Well, what about me when I already paid it? Yeah, but in this particular case, they were definitely defrauded. Like that is a different sort of thing. I don't know that conversation is even going to be had, but yeah, it's just devastating that you would do this. And look, the thing is that there's a version of this kind of baked into all student loan debt. It might not be as egregious as Corinthian in terms of like the actively lying about your job prospects and all that, having the far higher interest rates and everything. But I mean, can we really say that 17 and 8-year-olds who are signing on to these student loans really understand exactly what all of it means? Can really know exactly what their job prospects are at that moment, let alone 4 or 8 years later based on the degree that they get? A lot of it is speculation, and they are encouraged to spend a lot of money, encouraged not just by the schools, but also by every authority figure in their lives. You are brought up and told, here are the things you have to do, and you better do them. If you don't do them, you're lazy. And then when you do them, then they'll laugh in your face when you say, hey, maybe the debt doesn't need to be as bad as it is for all this stuff that you seem to indicate is mandatory.
Yep, I definitely think that they're missing something here. And also too, this really does seem like it's an effort to kind of stave off the calls for student loan debt relief from the Biden administration, and it's not going to work. You need to do more. Again, this is something that should have been done for these attendees of Corinthian colleges a long time ago. Apparently, they had made petitions to the Obama administration, and then those applications for debt relief had kind of just sat there during the Trump administration. So to finally do it now is great, but at the same time too, again, Biden doesn't get any credit or any kudos here when we were talking general debt relief for student loans for the vast majority of the public. And that's something that I would like to see actually put into place.
Yeah, exactly. He has nothing to do with this. And even if he did, this would be $6 billion out of well over $1 trillion in total student loan debt. So I'm not a great mathematician. That's like at most 1/3, that's being canceled. So no, it's a small fraction and it's not related to him. Interestingly, it is related to Kamala Harris. So back when she was the Attorney General of California, she sued the company back in 2013. Now, basically all of the campuses closed in 2015, so they didn't last much longer than this. I saw some people in the chat asking if they still operate. No, they had a lot of campuses and they had a lot of students for a number of years, but it stopped in 2015. Anyway, she had the case against Corinthian, and they ended up getting a judgment of $1.1 billion, including $820 million in restitution on behalf of students. There were civil penalties as well. That is part of what generated the fact that some students' debt has already been canceled. And we do want to give credit to what's called the Corinthian 15. It's a group of debtor activists who spent literally years fighting to get to where now this has reached, where people will get their money back. They had each individually been saddled with tens of thousands of dollars in debt, degrees that they considered utterly worthless. And they worked with the Debt Collective, which I believe we've had representatives from the Debt Collective on before. Anyway, that's the nation's first debtors union to try to get this cancellation. And so that is awesome. That still leaves, tens and tens of millions of students, burdened by a massive amount of debt. But it's good news for these. And hey, maybe if this news gets spread and people get excited around it, maybe that'll put a little bit of pressure on Joe Biden to go with the next step. Any other thoughts?
That would be really nice. Biden, do something, because it's kind of tiring now. We want the promises actually acted upon. I just feel like too often Biden's like, I may be the president and we have this issue, but gosh, what can I do about it? It's just like, do something, man.
I'm just the president. I'm so weak. I'm so weak.
I gotta reach across the aisle.
I know, exactly. I gotta spend, just give me like 6 more months reaching across the aisle. Just give me like 6 more months, come on. Anyway, with that said, why don't we move to a legal development? We've combed the interwebs for news that will play into Adrienne's particular expertise. So let's jump into this. A Texas law that would have had the effect of effectively banning social media moderation is now on hold, at least for now. So let's talk about what caused this. The Supreme Court has, for now, just temporarily blocked this Texas law that was earlier this week, and it would have restricted the ability of websites like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to moderate content on their platforms. It was a 5-4 vote, so still in the end, very close. But the justices granted an emergency request from the tech industry to block a lower court order that would have allowed the law to take hold while multiple challenges to the law continue forward. So 5-4, what's the breakdown? Well, the 5 justices in the majority who want the law to not go into effect just yet: Chief Justice John Roberts, Stephen Breyer, who's still making judgments, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Sonia Sotomayor. So an interesting ideological mix there. Liberal Justice Elena Kagan was joined by conservative justices Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Neil Gorsuch on the other side. Look, we're gonna get to more of the substance of how this is gonna go, but I found those groupings to be fascinating. Adrienne, have you seen this sort of 5-4 before?
All right, so Alito and Thomas always ride or die together. It's very rare that they are not in the same car, because that car is covered in kerosene and burning, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to conservative rhetoric. As far as Kagan goes, I think it's a stretch to call her a liberal. She just generally sides with the liberals. I would say she's more of a moderate, and you don't necessarily know which direction she's going to go. But I do think it's strange, and I did not get to read her dissent or her contribution to the conversation. But what I can tell you is that it's extremely wise that the majority in this case decided to go the way it did, because otherwise, if these operators for social media are not able to in any way regulate what's being said on their platforms, then it's just going to create avenues for people to oppress other people, mistreat other people, advance hate, and people aren't going to want to use those platforms at all. And as a result, tech isn't going to be as prosperous.
Yeah, it's a weird position for the supposed like the no government regulation side of the political spectrum to say these companies should have no ability to stop their products from becoming hell sites that nobody wants to engage with. That's a weird thing. But again, it's the rock and the hard place are their supposed commitment to free speech and their supposed commitment to deregulated industry. In this case, they had to choose and they chose. But really fast, I want to stay on what we were talking about because you have a lot more knowledge based on your history of following these sorts of cases. So you pointed out that Kagan is in an interesting position here. Generally, her being a moderate, I think for some people isn't going to help them to necessarily predict how she's going to go. Are there areas where you think she is more likely to go with or defy the other supposed liberals on the Supreme Court? Does it tend to break down along, like if you're talking about like religious liberty or about taxation or about gun control? Where would you expect her to be more or less likely to side with the liberals?
I actually can't tell you exactly where she would fall on specific issues. I can tell you when it's generally come to civil liberties and also things that you would say would impact the common man and aren't necessarily reflective of big business and uplifting capitalism, then you can generally find her on the other side. But this kind of decision here, which is why I would love to read her dissent if she did file one, because I know Alito did. But if she had something in particular to say, I would almost think that her decision, that it's probably based on something more technical. That's more based on legal precedent alone, as opposed to just wanting to uplift the GOP and conservative rhetoric, which is what Alito and Thomas do.
Look, and thank you for that explanation. I really do appreciate that. Going forward, we will have to see what ends up happening with this. There's going to be the legal challenges and all that. People are trying to figure out. I can see in the chat asking, so what under this would be allowed and what would? So Thomas Sears has a great sarcastic comment about, then how are they supposed to stop the porn that's getting so many people killed every day? No, but that's the thing though. Like they do want porn to be censored on these. They want these companies to censor all sorts of things. They have to pretend to have some sort of ideological opposition to censorship. But in practice, all they want is for their particular right-wing political views to be, not be disincentivized. They want it to be pushed, to actively be encouraged. So what they say in the law that any social media platform with at least 50 million monthly active users wouldn't be able to take down posts based on a user's viewpoint. And you can sue them if you think one of your things has been censored because of your political views. Well, what the hell does that mean? What's a political view? Is it a political view to say that sex work is work and thus it should be able to be advertised on one of these sites? That's inherently tied to politics in a whole bunch of different ways. So what they mean in practice is, if I say something insanely racist or anti-Semitic, you can't take it down because let's just be real. This is a pretty right-wing thing to do these days. Like that's what they mean. They want to protect right-wingers from censorship. They still think these companies should be able to block things like pornography and stuff like that. And you're gonna need to, if somebody's threatening violence and stuff like that, that's tied to politics, especially lately, political violence. But you clearly can't force these companies to leave that stuff up. So Adrienne, this is a murky topic. Do you have any idea of where legally this might end up?
Oh, well, if the Supreme Court actually decides to go ahead and move forward with hearing this case, which I don't know, it may do that at some point. The thing is that what we are seeing from a lot of states, this one included, is this desire to encroach upon private organizations, private entities. We've seen this in Florida with their bill in terms of not being able to teach DEI in the workplace. They are infringing on employers' decisions and private businesses' decisions in terms of how they wish to operate. And it doesn't intersect necessarily with civil rights issues in terms of uplifting and protecting that, because it's an aspect of the Civil Rights Act. So you can't, discriminate against a person. That makes sense in terms of regulating businesses, but not necessarily when it comes to how they decide to practice their own policies. And so when you have these social media outlets having policies about what you cannot and can post, to remember they're a public entity. And so it's a very dangerous precedent when you have laws like this, Texas law that's been passed, that communicates that no, we as a government can regulate what you do as a private company.
Yeah, you're right. And I think a lot of people are scared and uncertain about it. I mean, we are living in a crazy, a very unpredictable and scary time where we have no idea what the right is going to suddenly decide, like from one moment to the next, that they are all dead focused on. Like that social media companies are the devil, they need to be stopped from censoring us. They just will all of a sudden get around that. Or the biggest issue in the country is trans swimmers. We got to focus on that. Or all of a sudden Disney is the literal devil. Like, so let's outlaw Disney. You have no idea. Like, the left is so boring by comparison. We just want people to be paid like a reasonable amount for the labor that they do and be able to live and retire in dignity. Like, those don't those don't change a ton from year to year. They're a little bit predictable. With the right, you never know what's gonna happen. Anyway, with that said, we're gonna take our second break. When we come back, we've got some pretty fascinating topics to jump into, so I will see you on the other side.
Thank you all for coming out today. To the rabbis that are present, to all of my fellow Republicans, it is my great honor to welcome you to the Republican National Committee's first Jewish engagement office, and it all starts right here in Boca Raton, Florida.
That is Mike Pence working there with the RNC. That's one of the parts of the Republican Party that is not actively seeking his death. And there he is announcing this community center opening up in Boca Raton. He said there it's the first Jewish community center that the RNC is opening up, but it is not the first or the only community center. If you look at the headlines, you can find in Orange County, they had the RNC launch its first Asian Pacific American Center. This is back in July of last year. In Pembroke, North Carolina, they opened a community center. In Jacksonville, Florida, they opened a what they're calling a Black community center there. And these are, from all evidence, they are sort of designed to be normal community centers. You can go there and you can get movie nights and free dinners and holiday parties or gun safety training. That's the most like sort of right-wing political thing that they do there. But there's local organizers and the RNC helps to fund these things. They've dedicated millions of dollars to these different community centers. Of course, at the same time, it is the RNC. And so in theory, after providing these social services, they then can potentially influence those voters. And we know how powerful that close interaction, the direct one-to-one interaction with potential voters can be. So look, maybe Adrienne, this is a totally just honest thing where they want to give back specifically to the Jewish community, Asian American, Pacific Islander community, the Black community. Maybe it's more political than that, but they've been doing this. And honestly, up until when I saw this article on The Prospect, I did not know that any of this was happening.
Well, they aren't trustworthy. So I really do not believe that the thought that they're trying to uplift these communities as much as they're trying to infiltrate them, with misinformation, disinformation, anything that will hopefully get them more votes. And so it's very disconcerting, especially if they're targeting elderly communities in some way. But I would not put it past them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, definitely. The thing is, at the same time, like they're finally giving back. Like this is like the one thing that the Republican Party will do to help people is like a showing of like Moana or Suicide Squad or something, and then like a pancake breakfast or something. But look, here's the thing: it is if your reaction upon seeing this is that is insidious. It's because it's kind of a good idea for them, actually providing services to people that will want that, community building and all that, bringing in local activists. It's obviously for just really nasty political ends, but it's pretty clever on their part. It's also secretive, to be fair. There are no individual websites for each of these outposts or even a collective website that lists them. The RNC's homepage features only a camouflage search bar that can be prodded to give up the location of your nearest branch, and there's an interactive map that advertises various regional outreach events. There's some addresses, but there's no contact information, no phone numbers, no emails, no names, nothing. That seems weird. It seems like you'd want that information to be available. I don't know why they would hide that. I don't know if it's a funding thing or what. I don't know if any of these are going to exist after the midterm elections. One would imagine they would want to keep it going, but I don't know, like, should the Democrats be doing this? Would you caution communities that maybe engaging with this isn't in their best interests, or what would your approach be, Adrienne?
No, I think it's interesting. So in terms of why they don't have websites and all this stuff, on a website, if it's because of it's part of an organization, you need to acknowledge that. So any LLCs or anybody who's funding it has to be designated on that site. And I got to figure out who I'm going to sue if something goes down. That's essentially what I'm thinking. And they don't want you to figure out who truly is backing this stuff, who's paying for it, and also to be able to contact them. That's what that communicates to me. And so, yeah, I think it'd be great if the Democrats did something like this. Without a doubt, it's just I'm definitely very concerned with whatever insidious business that the RNC is doing on the ground floor. But I do think that there are people out there who are going to see the RNC and the Republican Party as something positive as a result of these efforts.
Yeah, I think so. And meanwhile, if the Democrats were to set up something like this, it would at the very least be declared to just be propaganda, which, look, in practice, it probably would have a component of that, but also probably grooming too, considering that we're in 2022. That's what would happen. And really fast, I want to go through some of why this might be significant going forward. So there's an off-cited study from political scientists Alan Gerber and Don Green, says that one face-to-face conversation can boost a voter's likelihood of going to the polls by up to 20%. So in a close race, that could be significant, especially in this case. These are community centers, some of which have been started a year and a half before the midterm elections. So they've had a lot of time to sort of build up their profile in the community and meet a lot of people. And I wanted to go to a quote from Chuck Rocha, who we've brought on the show many times. He says this is really smart politics because they have unlimited money and support. They can go in and put these community centers up with the facade that they care about the community. What they're really trying to do is spend a bunch of money just to get 3 or 4 more % of the black or brown vote. And yeah, I think that there's a good chance that that might work. Obviously, there's been attempts over the past few years in the wake of the 2012 election. There was that postmortem about how the right should try to be more appealing to Latino voters, and they immediately dispensed with that and decided to go with Trump. But Trump did better among some non-white communities than past Republicans did. So I don't know, this is a more positive version of that attempting to peel off some voters than some of what I have seen from them. But anyway, any final thoughts, Adrienne?
Yeah, I definitely think that it may be a good look for the Republican Party, in part because I do think Trump sullied a lot in terms of his appearance, how he talked about people, how he interacted with people, and the Republican Party is trying to at least appear to be somewhat sensible in return from that. And so having more of a ground floor approach, even if it is wholly misrepresentative of their actual intentions, it's something that will probably end up working in their benefit.
Yeah. Okay, we've got one more story we're gonna talk about through the course of this hour. Plausibly for a lot of you, this will be seen as good news. I'm gonna read a couple of your comments, including, I wanted to read this. This is a YouTube comment from AC Erickson, who said, in relation to a conversation we were just recently having, I've been disabled since 2014. My $43,000 in student loans were recently forgiven. Haven't heard anything about paying taxes. I wish everyone could feel the relief of not being buried in loan debt. That's very good news. I hope that there does not. Surprise tax bills are the literal worst. I found out, was it last year? I had like thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes from like, I don't know if it was 7 years ago, 11 years ago. And of course there had been fines and fees that had, like gathered since then. And I was left wondering, like, I've paid my taxes many times since then. Why didn't you say anything over the last 8 years or whatever? It's weird that they can do that. They can actively hide your debt from you and then collect on it, but that's the system we have. Anyway, with that said, Sina Hagoboom in the, I believe this is the members comment, says community centers, sounds like grooming. Exactly, that's what we were alluding to earlier. Gabby says, there are times I want to rage quit this country and just move back to Spain. Adrienne can come, but John, there are no Pop-Tarts, so I don't know if you'll be able to hack it there. Hey. Somebody watching this is in Spain right now. There's Pop-Tarts, right? That's a global brand. There's got to be Pop-Tarts. Anyway, Infantry Chef says, I was going to buy Elden Ring, but I'm afraid it might influence me to cast spells at Home Depot. That would be scary. Eric says, if this is yesterday's D block, you were right to save this for Adrienne. This is right up her alley. It was actually, and I agree. I think we were right to save that previous story for her. Okay, Sophie says it used to be so hard to get Pop-Tarts in England that we would bring them in our suitcases. Oh my God, I love the commitment to Pop-Tarts. Anyway, let's see. Jan and Foolery says, member for 17 months, says like button smashed and stream shared, much appreciated. Chubtoad's been here for 18 months, says hashtag Koopa Lives Matter. I don't know if that's a reference to Mitch McConnell earlier, I'm not sure. Textan says, Adrienne trying to one-up the doc on his work ethic. That's a steep hill. Yeah, well, to be fair.
I can't do that, yeah.
Nope,
no,
nobody
I'm not.
can.
No.
Also, he has had very good and understandable reasons to not be able to do the show this week. So it is great to have people like Adrienne who can just absolutely take over a show and do an awesome job while people are off taking care of really terrible life developments. So, okay, let's see. Mark Murray says, my loans were canceled earlier this year and it was not counted as income. Mine were canceled based on disability, so that may fall under a different category than the Corinthian cancellations. Mark, I'm not sure, but thank you to everybody who, I love having an audience that can jump in and give us their life experiences because we can't know all of this. So it's good to have all of you able to help. Okay, with that said, I apologize for going on. Let's jump into this. I've been noticing some what I consider to be weird propaganda around a particular story this week. And I wanna give you a version of it. You might have come across this news in a different guise. Here's the headline I saw on Axios: coffee, the healthy indulgence. And then the first line you can see down at the bottom says, coffee is one of life's rarest gifts, a pleasure that's good for you. And I don't see anything about this being sponsored, although it appears that this article was literally written by coffee. That is the most biased headline. Look, I drink coffee, I love coffee. I am drinking coffee right now. And in honor of this story, this is actually caffeinated despite being my third mug of coffee today. And I get that there is good news on the coffee front. It's weird how people love when there's good coffee news. They go wild for it, and that includes people who write articles like this. So what did we find out recently? Well, they summarize it on Axios as saying that coffee lengthens your life, reduces the risk of dementia, stroke, and heart failure, protects against type 2 diabetes, prostate cancer, and liver disease, and also boosts your mood. But in particular, there's this new study in the Annals of Internal Medicine that found that those who drink 1.5 to 3.5 cups a day, even when sweetening it with something like sugar, were 29 to 31% less likely to die than non-drinkers. There's another study that found something similar. Now, we have to be honest. They're not saying it's causal, that they've established a causal link, that it is the coffee that does it, but they have noticed that there is this linkage. So plausibly, coffee drinking could sustain your life. Adrienne, what do you think about this?
Well, I think the same thing I thought yesterday before I found out about this story, that coffee's nasty. It does absolutely nothing for me. I'm a tea person. That's right, I will fight you. Coffee does nothing for me. I don't understand why people are excited about it. I'm sure it will lengthen your life because it's a little bit of an addiction. So I know it gives a lot of you the reason you get up in the morning. And I like to think that my reasons are different, but I'm happy that you all are happy, but I think you got a problem. All of you got a problem.
I think, I have to wonder if I've now solved a mystery because I came into the studio to do the show and each of our blocks has a title for the story. And originally it was like coffee study or something. And now it says coffee is gross, tea rules. Was that you that changed the title?
No, I didn't change the title, but my God, I think it hurt me. That's for sure.
There's another tea saboteur in our system. But anyway, look, I think that this is great news as one of the normal, well-adjusted people who loves life and thus drinks coffee. I do enjoy this. I like tea too. I do drink tea. I do think tea is a little bit unsatisfying unless you add milk to it. It's just too thin. Like my system is used to being hit by like a double shot of Pop-Tarts or a Crunchwrap Supreme. You can't give me flavored like just water. It has to have something in it. But anyway, good news for me, has no effect on Adrienne. Sorry, maybe your good news will come.
You're addicted to the caffeine, by the way. It's not the coffee, totally it's the caffeine.
Yeah. I know. I do drink a lot of decaf coffee too. I like drinking hot beverages. That's all I'm saying. But you're right. Definitely addicted to the caffeine too. Also, tea has tons of positive health effects. Let's be clear about that. Anyway, with that said, we're unfortunately out of time for our first hour. Thank you to those listening to the podcast or watching on one of our linear platforms. But if you're on Twitch or YouTube, we do have more to get to, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Buster Be Good says, hail to the Queen Segway Dragon. Your segues, sorry if not spelled correctly, but you know what I mean. Ma'am, you have very smooth transitions. Yes, so I had pointed that out when I was last on Indisputable. Adrienne is the queen of the very smooth segue from one topic to the next. And I often am terrible at it. Anyway, Adrienne, I know you stepped away for a minute, but someone called you Queen Segway Dragon.
Oh, that's so kind.
It is a difficult skill actually to do it and have it not be either awkward or lame, and you're quite good at it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.